Welcome back to another video lecture for critical reasoning, or not critical reasoning, for Philosophy 101 hybrid class. We have a little bit more of the Code of Intellectual Conduct to cover, so we're going to cover the rest of those principles today. Sorry I couldn't do this one live. Things are just too crazy busy. You can see the boxes and we're moving out, so tomorrow's the moving day. So appreciate your understanding. I will be working to try to have that regular schedule of 8 o'clock on Mondays and Wednesdays as like our regular live streaming lecture time. So try to count on that, or take me at my word that we're going to try to make that happen, and we'll try to keep up that schedule starting next week. We should have most of the moving stuff done by then. And I was just feeling crazy last night too. I didn't take good care of myself. Talked with students for like 8 hours yesterday or something. It was crazy. But anyway, let's pick up where we left off. I'm pretty sure that we got here to, we did the structural principle, and I talked about question begging, and I think that's where we left off. So I think we're here with the relevance principle. And this principle is not too complicated. One who presents an argument for or against a position should set forth only reasons whose truth provides some evidence for the truth of the conclusion. Out there, the being relevant, staying on task, that's important. I'm sure we've all had experiences where we were, having a debate about something, and then the subject keeps getting changed, or we go on so many tangents that you never got any like productive work done. So that's not cool. And staying on task is definitely an important part of any kind of purposeful conversation. And there's some like task at hand that you're trying to do. In the case of a debate, trying to figure out whether a certain claim is true or false is usually what we're up to, or trying to figure out what's the best answer to a question. And sticking to that question is a good thing, or sticking to that particular claim is a good thing. Now, the relevance principle gives us a little bit more than just stay on track. It does give us the condition for relevance. Notice how it says here, it sets forth reasons whose truth provides some evidence for the truth of the conclusion. That's the key. That's the key condition here. That the only things that should be brought up in the debate are things that are going to help us explore the truth of the claim in question, or the truth of like what's the right answer to a certain question. So when we are critically analyzing those answers. Now, I think that's pretty straightforward. But I want to take this, I want to use the relevance principle as an opportunity to talk a little bit about emotions and the role that emotions play in rational debate. Now, maybe you've heard of this kind of like heart-head dichotomy thing. There's some people who are like head people, that they like use reason and analyze things to figure out what to do, and they're like dispassionate and use these analytic tool things, and so they're intellectual. And then there's other people who are like, they make decisions with their intuition or with their gut or with their heart. Like they let that guide their decision making and how they look at things, rather than like trying to crunch the numbers or something using reason. I've always been really frustrated with this whole heart-head dichotomy, that like there's a kind of choice between these two, or that there's some people who work with one and not the other. I think it's not so much a matter of different types of people. I mean, this is Tim 2 cents time. I'm not your authority instructor person. This is just me thinking about this stuff for myself. And I know people have different tendencies, and they have things that they're comfortable with. I think there's different skill sets, and largely it just comes from working with those different facets of who you are. But those facets are present in everybody. All of us have intuitions. We have a heart. We have emotions. We also have reason. We are all rational beings. We can think using reason. If we actually think about it, like even someone who seems like they're acting totally irrationally and crazy is still using the faculty of reason as a part of how they're approaching the situation. Reason's kind of ubiquitous and unavoidable. Just might be a matter of emphasis about what's getting prioritized. But the other thing that kind of like has always bugged me about this head-heart dichotomy is as if they kind of are in opposition to each other. Like they're not compatible. They can't work together. They're at odds. That like reason doesn't understand the ways of the heart, and if you're operating with your heart or emotions, they're like blind. They don't have any perspective the way that reason does. They can't see past their own reality, their own experience. That stuff's always kind of bothered me. And I've, as a philosopher, and as soon as you start saying some philosophy things, have people have a tendency to say that you are, an intellectual head person and put you into that category. So that's happened to me plenty of times. And I'm like, I'm a human being too. I have feelings about things. I experience even abstract philosophical concepts as having emotional content to them. So I think that kind of stuff is possible. We do a lot of like, oh, well, you're this thing or you're that thing, and things are, I think, a little more complicated than that. But anyway, the real question here with emotions is what role can emotions play within rational intellectual debate? That's a big question. And it's a controversial question. I don't think that there's a really clear answer to this. Or one that, not an answer that is something everyone might agree to or that is sort of taken for granted as like, oh, well, duh, this is the answer or something like that. I've thought about it a lot, being a human being who's decided to spend a lot of time thinking about rational inquiry. Sorry, that was my window. Yes, I'm still there. Google's giving me trouble. Sorry about that interruption. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I mean, I've got this emotional side to me, and I got this reason side to me, and then there's this whole truth-seeking thing that I want to do. So how am I supposed to negotiate those things? How am I supposed to put them together? On the one hand, so I'm going to give you guys my kind of like best answer that I've come up with in my life experience. So this is just my 2 cents sort of thing. I'm not saying it's from an authority sort of position other than maybe my own experience, but I don't want you to take it on my authority. I want you to think about it for yourself and see whether this is a good answer. But I have a suggestion about how to think about emotions in the context of rational debate. There's a lot of dust in here. It's in my eyes. It's always something. I was sneezing the other day. Now it's dust in the eyes. It's crazy. Anyway, so here's some of the considerations. On the one hand, emotions don't seem to count as evidence. Seems like something that the relevance principle might cut out. Like, just because I like an idea doesn't mean that it's true, or just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's false. Just because like emotions can get triggered for all sorts of crazy reasons. Sometimes they do seem to indicate something that's true, and I'm about to talk about that facet in a second. But in plenty of other cases, I think we're really familiar with how misguided our emotional reactions can be sometimes, how inappropriate that it's like has nothing to do with something else. Like, how many times have you had a debate about one thing with someone, usually like say someone really close to you, like a family member or close friend or significant other or something like that. You're having this debate, but whatever you're debating, it's not really about that. It's about something else that's kind of unspoken and hasn't been talked about. But the emotions of that unresolved, unspoken issue are really what's motivating what's happening in the debate. That's a good example of like emotions misfiring. They're not really giving any insight or lending any kind of weight to one claim or another. So we have to watch out for that. The other thing we have to watch out for here is the ego. The ego is definitely the boogeyman that constantly throws a wrench in all these efforts to do this truth-seeking thing. And the ego is not shy about using emotions to try to get its way or to influence things in the way that it is satisfied with. So the ego is, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that generates emotions. When our egos are under attack, that makes us feel vulnerable. It makes us feel fear. It might make us feel anger or get defensive or all sorts of things. So you have to watch out for emotions. It doesn't seem like just because I feel a certain way about something that therefore it is true or false or whatever. So emotions on their own don't seem to quite be good enough for evidence. So that's consideration on one hand. But on the other hand, emotions also are kind of like indicators. They're like how pain is like alerting you to something, and it may not be telling you what, but it might be sort of directing your attention somewhere. So you feel pain I feel a pain in my wrist, and I'm like, I don't know what's wrong, but I know something is wrong because I'm feeling the pain. And I think most emotions are like this, that the object of the emotion may be pretty ambiguous or unclear. And even so, like, you're like, say a good example would be something like, you're like, I don't know, I'm so happy today. I just like feel great. Like, I don't know why. It doesn't have, it's not like there's a particular thing that you're happy about. You're just in this kind of state of happiness, or maybe you're in kind of like a state of anxiety or depression or something, and it's very unclear what's going on with that. There's no particular object that the emotion is located with. Other times there might be an object. It might be like, I'm really pissed at this person or something like that. So you're like, no, there is an object that it's latched onto. Like when I feel the pain in my wrist, I'm like, there's something in my wrist. But I still might not know if the object of my emotion is the cause of my emotion. In other words, the thing that the emotion is being sensitive to, what caused it to appear, may not be the thing that is its object. That might be projected, like in this case of having a conversation about one thing when it's really about something totally different. So that can happen too. So I think emotions are not clear. They're sending messages, and they direct attention, kind of like a fire alarm, like you have maybe a carbon emissions alarm or something like that. I don't know. I've got this special detector in my apartment now that's supposed to detect some dangerous gas. You got a detector, but you don't know what it's for. Say you don't know what the purpose is. I've got this box that I don't even know what chemical it's supposed to be indicating to me. So imagine it going off, and I'm like, well, something's going on, but I don't know what. And I think that's emotion. They indicate things, but it's not clear what they're indicating. So if they're indicators that, oh my gosh, why is this still happening? I'm gonna, there's some sort of setting thing. I might just keep trying to move the mouse and we'll deal with these. I just want to we'll get this lecture turned out. You guys can deal with a couple notifications. My apologies for a smoother online experience. Alright, so as an indicator, the emotion might be telling us that something is significant, and that might be very relevant for figuring out what's going on in this debate over something being true or false. So that's maybe a possibility here. But what we have to do is follow up on those emotions. I don't think they speak for themselves. I don't think they're very clear about how they could be used or how they might. I guess I'd put my proposal this way: emotions aren't evidence, but they might lead us to evidence. Think about them like a lead, like a detective that gets like an anonymous tip. Well, they can't use that in court. That's not admissible evidence, just that kind of hearsay. But getting that information might give them a lead that then they can follow up on in their investigation and maybe find something that's like legitimate evidence that they can use in a court. So that's how I think emotions work. That if we like ignored emotions because we're like, well, it's not evidence, so it can't be useful for rational discourse, then we'd be missing out on a really important source of potential information, of like things that could be useful to sorting out the truth of something. Take like emotions in context of moral debate is a good example. Our moral emotions are like alerting us sometimes of things that are morally significant features of a case. Like I see my neighbor kicking his dog or something like over and over and laughing. I'm like just disgusted by that. I'm like, that my emotion is like a vehicle for me seeing some kind of wrongdoing, some kind of injustice. And again, I might not be able to know exactly what it is, but it's directing my attention to something significant. So maybe then I rationally reflect on that emotion and I say, you know, what is this emotion trying to show me? What is it sensitive to? What triggered it? And then once the emotion has kind of directed my attention, it's done its job. The weight of it that it has is not any weight for the claim. It doesn't evaluate its own evidence very well, but it still is maybe getting me to the evidence. So then once I get this thing, whatever it is that the emotion is trying to point out, I'm like, cool, thanks emotion, you can go now, and now I will use reason to try to sort out what's significant about this thing and how it could be used for an argument. What kind of evidence can it work toward? So that's my suggestion, that we got to let emotions into the picture, and that it's not like if we're going to have an intellectual debate that we have to check our emotions at the door or something like that and just ignore them. I think that they're very useful, but they also have to be followed up on, and we have to keep in mind the fact that emotions can misfire. They can indicate just as often as they can misrepresent, or they might be triggered by something particular, but not something that's relevant to the debate that's taking place. So that's my suggestion. So I encourage you, if you're feeling emotional about what's happening in class or in a debate, or I don't know, hopefully a philosophy will like get you going at some point this quarter and ramp you up. It's not just totally boring. It like has some kind of gravity to it. I hope that happens. And when that happens, then reflect on it. Think about, what is your emotion telling you? Is it something that can work legitimately in an argument or not? But like I said in class, like your opinion doesn't really count for anything in philosophy. Like just someone's perspective or someone's like belief set, that on its own doesn't have weight. When we're debating truth, it's not a democracy. It's not a matter of what most people think that that's what's true or something like that. We have to be a little more critical than that. But your experience and your perspective might be an indicator that there's a good argument there. So don't be afraid of using it. But it's just in its kind of like raw format, it's not going to be relevant. We need to process it and figure out, what is it that my experience has shown me that might be a universal consideration, something that applies to all of us in thinking about the truth of this matter, and not just for me, right? Not just my truth or something like that. Philosophers aren't really trying to get at that. They're trying to figure out what's really true for everyone, sort of thing. So if you want to talk about that more, there's definitely fertile ground here for debate itself. Like I said, I don't think any answer here is going to be uncontroversial. That's my best bet, my best offering here for how to figure out the role that emotions can play in debate. And I'm open to suggestions. If you there it goes again. Yes, I'm still here, still talking to you guys about the relevance principle. So let's move on to something else. Maybe that's a good indicator that it's time to move on to something else. All right. Next up is the acceptability principle. Now, this is a principle that I think should be stricken from the code entirely. I don't really like it. And for the sake of time here, because I definitely want to do this all for you in a timely manner, so it's not a huge lecture to listen to, but the acceptability principle is effectively putting a kind of, I'll let you read it here yourself. You can take a look at that on your own. But what it's effectively doing is putting up a filter on what can get into the debate in the first place. So remember, the code of intellectual conduct is trying to set up the rules for debate. It's trying to lay the ground rules here, the framework under which the debate will happen. Notice, so far the code has been very, very careful to not make any claims about what we should positively believe, like the content of our beliefs. It's not really doing that very much. It's just giving us a framework, giving us a process, a procedure for how to have those debates about what it is we should believe. But here, now it's starting to do something a little different, and that's what makes me suspicious of it. So I've used this metaphor before with you guys. Like, the code's got principles that govern how we come to the table, what happens at the table, and then how we leave. So that the table is kind of like the playground of the debate. And when I say we throw something on the table, it's like making a claim in that discussion. I'm making an argument or something like that. And the acceptability principle is saying the only stuff that can get on the table is stuff that's not crazy. Like, where's the phrase here? It says, should provide reasons that are likely to be accepted by a mature, rational person, and that meet standard criteria of acceptability, which is kind of some common sense principles. It's nothing from left field. It's pretty like ordinary, run-of-the-mill, mainstream philosophical views about knowledge and argument and rationality and that sort of thing. So it's filtering out all the crazy people, and I don't like that. I like crazy people. Sometimes I feel like I'm the crazy person in some philosophy debates. Certainly in grad school, I had a few philosophical positions that were generally unpopular, and I had to do a lot of work to convince people they were even worth considering. So I know what it's like to be the crazy person. And I think not just that I can sympathize with them is the reason why I'm kind of opposed to this principle, or that I am the crazy person and I don't appreciate being excluded from the conversation. But there's a couple reasons why I think talking to crazy people is worthwhile. One, they're sometimes right, and history bears this out. Sometimes the really crazy ideas are the ones that end up becoming accepted. And if we just dismiss them all as being counterintuitive when we first encountered them, then maybe we wouldn't have ever figured out that we had made some kind of mistake, that we wouldn't have confirmed that they were actually the case. So that's one reason. Sometimes it's just so crazy that it actually works. So sometimes the crazy ideas are true. I wouldn't want us to lose out on those resources for debate when we're pursuing the truth. Second reason, though, I think is even more important. Even if the crazy people are wrong, and like crazy wrong, sometimes engaging with them is very useful because it provokes us to actually have to articulate a defense of common sense claims, of things that we like easily take for granted. And in doing so, we have a closer, more authentic relationship with holding that belief. With a lot of common sense beliefs, we just take them for granted. We're like, if someone asks us for a reason, we're like, are you crazy? Like some kind of response like that. Are you crazy? Like, you don't need a reason. And that's not a very good reason to just be like, I can't see why not. It just doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive. Counterintuitive. That's I've got a little axe to grind about intuition. I'll save that for a later date. We'll talk about intuitions later this quarter. But basically, I think having someone push you about the things that are easy to take for granted is useful. It teaches us something. Even when our positions haven't changed at the end of the debate, we still have the same conclusion that we had when we started. We might have a deeper relationship with you. Here's one of my favorite examples. Philosopher Nietzsche. Maybe some of you guys have read some Nietzsche. Nietzsche's kind of a crazy dude. He is a very crazy dude. He has some pretty extreme conclusions that he wants to defend. A good one to use as an example here is that Nietzsche is anti-egalitarian. He does not believe that all human beings have equal moral worth or value. That's a major claim. Very counterintuitive, especially to pretty much everyone I'd expect in this class who's not a fascist or something like that. Most of us are egalitarians, and I think that is the right position to adopt, but try defending egalitarianism. On what basis should we believe that everyone has moral worth? I think there are arguments for that, but I don't think that we articulate them to ourselves very often. And having someone like Nietzsche come along and be like, I'm not so sure about this egalitarianism thing, and here's some reasons why I'm skeptical, that actually might get us to reflect in ways that we wouldn't. And then after that, if we're like, yeah, you're wrong, Nietzsche. Yes, egalitarianism is correct because of something. Now we've got that something on offer, and we know why we hold the beliefs that we do. So we're in a better position, a more authentic position in how we hold those beliefs once we're acquainted with those reasons. We're not doing it arbitrarily or thoughtlessly, and that's a big benefit. It's a big benefit. So if you want to hear more about Nietzsche sometime, I spent a lot of time studying this guy, and I disagree with over 90% of what he says. Like, I oftentimes like some of his points and some of his arguments, but in terms of his conclusions, like, no. I totally disagree with him on his positions. But I still think he's really worth studying. I think it's really good to engage with the opposition, with the opponents. I'm going to take a little break here. I'll catch up with you in a second. All right, so one final thing I'll say here about the acceptability principle. I can charitably understand one sort of reason for running this principle. And that's in contexts where the debate has limited resources. You don't have all the time in the world. There's a decision that needs to happen with urgency, something like that. And in those kinds of cases, like imagine something like serving on like some board or a leadership team or something like that. In those circumstances, then maybe it wouldn't be good to let the crazy voices into the conversation and kind of derail things and maybe waste time. It might be important to consider the most intuitive, the options that have the most recommending them, that seem the most likely to be the right answer. Maybe those should be explored first before you might start talking about the crazy things. So I can see that there being a sort of rationale for prioritizing the common sense stuff first. But even there, I mean, sometimes it's good to have someone push us to know like why we're doing what we're doing, rather than just being like, oh yeah, that's the way we do things, or that's what makes sense. I mean, it's just not very critically reflective. So I still have some concerns about that. Certainly for our purposes in a philosophy class, let the crazy in, because I mean, if you got crazy ideas, that's fine. We can bring them in there. We don't have to make any decisions. This is just all speculation and discussion in terms of a philosophy class. This is the playground for kicking around these ideas. So if something is like totally off topic or something like that, I might, do some kind of moderation in class. If that was happening, I might be like, let's talk about this after class or something like that. But I recommend erring on the side of bringing that kind of stuff up. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Okay, that's acceptability. Let's keep going. Sufficiency, all I really want to add here to our understanding of the sufficiency principle is that I think the basic point here is that even if you're saying relevant things or you have something to say to defend your position, it doesn't mean that you have done enough to justify your position. The things you have to say might be fairly weak on balance or considered alongside the arguments that your opponent has. Your arguments might not be sufficient to outweigh the concerns. Think about it. If it was, I hate pro-con lists more than anything. They're so not the best model for reasoning. But if you imagine like a simple pro-con list, just because something is a pro, there might be a whole lot of cons that outweigh that pro. So that fact that there is something to recommend this course of action or whatever it is, doesn't mean that that's going to be sufficient defense to justify believing it. So recognizing that there might be a need for an amount of argument too, or strong enough points to defend your conclusion. That's also significant. So that's the sufficiency principle. I don't have too much more to add on that. The rebuttal principle is really important. And in fact, actually, I want to read it to you. Let's bring it back up. Okay. Rebuttal principle says, one who presents an argument for or against a position should include in the argument an effective rebuttal to all anticipated serious criticisms of the argument that may be brought against it or against the position it supports. That is very strongly worded. That principle is impossible to fulfill. You have to anticipate all serious criticism and be able to give an effective argument against them. That's ridiculous. It's really, really hard to do. This is probably the principle on the code that is the hardest to satisfy. Because we aren't very used to, like, remember when we were talking about charity, we're not very used to coming up with arguments for our opponents. That's just not something we're spending a lot of time on. We spend a lot more time thinking about why we're right, like rationalizing our own beliefs and perspectives and things like that. So to even get into our opponent's shoes, to like imagine why something that we think is false makes sense, that's kind of hard. I mean, if you thought it made sense, you might believe it's true. You wouldn't believe it's false. So there's kind of a funny little psychological thing going on there. So that muscle, I think, is generally pretty weak in us, but it can be strengthened with practice. The more you do it, the easier it gets to do that sort of thing. How you can like jump from position to position. Also, by just exploring a debate and recognizing that there is controversy in there, you might lose some confidence on one side or the other. So it makes it a little easier to jump around. You're like, oh yeah, I mean, there's those points, and then there's also those points. I'm kind of impressed by both of them. To be charitable, like with the fallibility principle, to be charitable doesn't require you to not have commitments. I don't think people are like robots that as soon as they accept the belief as true, now it's like in their head like a program and they can't think any other way anymore. I don't think that people work like this. Sometimes they work like this, but I don't think that's a necessary connection. Having conviction, having confidence doesn't mean you're closed-minded and can't entertain your opponent, and it doesn't mean that you might not be able to imagine what your opponent could say, like coming up with arguments that support them, like Charity was asking us to do. The rebuttal principle relies on Charity, because first you have to anticipate those criticisms. You have to come up with arguments for your opponent. But now we're talking about arguments your opponent will use to show why you're wrong, not just arguments they could use to support their side positively, but how they could make negative objections against your position. Where is your argument weak or open to objection? Where are those chinks in the armor? That sort of thing. That's what you want to be able to do to satisfy the rebuttal principle. And then you have to argue against those objections. You have to actually give an adequate defense that deals with that. Now, the rebuttal principle, if you don't do this at all, then your case for your conclusion is going to be fairly weak. Because there's in any debate that's worth having, where there's any kind of perplexity or controversy, there's going to be arguments for both sides of the debate, or any of the sides if there's more than two. There's more than two options. Anything that's going to have controversy about it that means that there are good arguments. There's something that at least appears strong to support all the case of all the parties involved. Is that anything worth debating is going to have that happening already. So to just Pretend like that's not happening would be absurd. If I'm just like, well, look at all the things that are good about my position, that's not going to be enough to win in the debate if there's strong things on the opponent's side too. So that's especially why the rebuttal principle is so crucial for making a strong case. But it's also important not just so that you can defend your position more strongly, but also for, of course, the purposes of truth seeking. That we have to look at figuring out. We're trying to figure out what's the most defensible position on the issue. Not just is there some excuse I can have to retain the beliefs that I already have, but what are the beliefs that have the most recommendation for them? What are the best answers out there? Not just that the one that I am like personally attached to meets some minimal threshold of adequacy, so it's permissible for me to keep holding it as a belief. That sounds like making an excuse, and we're interested in something a little bit more than just an excuse not to change. We want to figure out the best thing. What's the ideal belief set that we could have? So that's what's going on with the rebuttal principle. Another, just like I'm a big fan of charity. I think charity is the soul of the code sort of thing. Rebuttal is really the follow through on that. After I come up with arguments for my opponent, I still need to respond to them. I still need to say something. This is going to be very, very important for your paper. So let me say a couple more things about rebuttal here. The hardest thing that you're going to have to do on your paper is to engage with your opponent. Every time I teach this class, every time I walk students through writing a philosophy paper, this is inevitably the biggest problem that everyone has. And when I get your drafts, your paper outlines and your drafts, you can count on me saying you need to engage with your opponent more. I mean, it's been very, very rare that I've gotten a paper where I'm like, you're doing a pretty adequate job there. There's always more to do. Remember how strongly worded the principle was. So it's really easy to leave that out. Very easy to not consider those sorts of things. And that's going to be very important to do. The fact that you're engaging your opponent in the sense of bringing up their arguments is also not going to be sufficient to satisfy with that. Engaging means not just presenting, but like dealing with it, like having to like address those problems. There it goes again. I don't know why it wasn't doing that the other day. Now it's doing it now. Goes to the machine. Anyway, so when I ask you to do that in your paper, it won't be enough to just be like, here's what they'd have to say, to be charitable and present the arguments for them. You also have to address them. You have to respond to those arguments. Pretty much every philosophy paper has this. Usually has some section like this. Some of the selections you might not see at this quarter, but that's because it's like a part of a book or something, and they did it in some other place. But most like, on average, 15, 20 page papers that get published in philosophy journals these days will have like, here's the background on the topic. Here's where I'm inserting myself into the conversation. Here's what the story so far. Here's what I want to say. Here's my defense for it. That's like the body of it. And then at the end of the paper, they'll be like, here's some objections and my replies. And that's a really great way of doing it. You got to have that follow through with the replies. Remember when we were talking about charity, I was saying the fact that you're coming up with arguments for your opponent doesn't mean you can't disagree with them. In fact, that's what we want you to do. We want you to give them your best shot. Then we can see where we're really at. We can see what's the state of the debate after we've seen both sides really give us the best that they have to offer. And then we can evaluate and pick up the pieces and see where to go from here. So that's what I want to see on the paper, and that's what the rebuttal principle is asking for. Two more fallacies. These last two fallacies, or gosh, not fallacies. My apologies, not fallacies. I don't know where that word came from. And the last two principles on the code, things that we want to do, govern what happens, how we should lead the debate. Where should we be going after the debate is concluded? What's the right dismount from the debate? And we got two of them, the suspension of judgment principle and the resolution principle. And there's a lot of words there. And these are another couple principles that I'd want to revise a little bit. Because I think the bottom line here is that the suspension of judgment principle and the resolution principle are basically asking for us to take the results of a debate seriously. To not just be like, here, I'll give you an example. So if like we have a debate and I presented a position, then you presented all these objections, and I'm like, shit, I can't really deal with those objections. Good point. Well, I guess I'm just going to keep going about my life as if this discussion never happened and just pretend like those objections don't exist, and I'm going to keep holding on to the beliefs that you showed me are totally absurd or whatever, seriously problematic. That would be really insincere. That wouldn't be what a truth seeker would do, right? That's kind of getting away from the whole point of this. The reason why we want to explore and have these debates is so we can figure out what beliefs we ought to hold, so that we can actually hold those beliefs, not just do something that's like an intellectual exercise. So that's, I think, what's at stake here with those two principles. Pretty simple idea. Take the results of the debate seriously. But I think the way that those principles are encouraging behavior that's supposed to be the like sincere response is a little too restrictive. I think it's a little too narrow. That they could have had a bigger imagination here. Edward, the author of this code, could have had a bigger of an imagination about what a sincere and authentic response to a debate could look like. The way that these two principles set them up, it's sort of like if one side was the clear winner, then that's what you should believe. Like leaving the debate, you should adopt those beliefs. If you started the debate with those beliefs, keep them. If you didn't, give up your old beliefs, take on the new ones. The suspension of judgment principle saying if there's not a clear winner, then all sides basically should give up their commitments to their sides and remain open on this issue. In other words, to be agnostic. Maybe you've heard that agnostic word before in relation to like whether God exists, beliefs about whether God exists. So you got theism. A theist is someone who believes that God exists. You have atheists that believe that God positively does not exist. And then there's agnostics, and they're like, we're not sure. And that is actually a positive position. Agnosticism is saying, effectively, that the most rational response to this question of does God exist is to not have a commitment either way, to say basically that we don't know, that we can't know. The atheist and the theist both think that we can know that there is rational justification for adopting this position. So it's not like being an agnostic is an easier answer. It means you don't have to defend anything. I mean, you'd have to argue under agnosticism why things are indeterminate, and that's exactly what's going on with the suspension of judgment principle. It's only appropriate to be on the fence there if there isn't a clear reason for preferring one of these positions over the other. If the debate's kind of inconclusive or indeterminate. Or where both sides have good points, but they have like equal positives and negatives. They've got equal amounts of things recommending them and equal deficiencies or something like that. So then we should suspend judgment, be agnostic on whatever that particular issue is of debate. There's a bunch of problems I have with these responses. I think the authentic response could look like one of those options, could look like one of those responses. But there's some other kinds of acceptable responses too. Let me outline a couple of them for you. A couple good examples. In one, I could say, so let's go back to that situation. We stayed up all night and I was telling you about my theory of the meaning of life, and you're like, yeah, that's bullshit because look at all these objections. And I'm like, oh crap, you're right. I don't know how to deal with your objections. I could say, I don't know how to deal with your objections. Let me think about that and get back to you. That's acceptable. I could be like, I'm not so ready to give up on these. I still kind of feel like there's some good ideas here, but I recognize my burden of proof. I know that if I can't deal with these objections, then I can't keep holding this perspective. But I could say, not quite ready to give up yet, and then spend some more time on it. The reason why that can be a sincere response, I believe, is because, okay, that's got to be the last time this is going to happen today. Sorry, guys. The reason that can be a sincere response is that debates are not things that are in like a little box. They're things that are constantly ongoing. I mean, the history of philosophy is a perfect example of this. We've had debates that have been stretching on an on and off basis for thousands of years. There might be some periods in there where like people are like, yeah, we don't care about this problem. No one's working on it. No one's discussing it. But then a little bit later, someone's like, hey, remember that problem? We should keep working on that. Here's some new ideas about it. And so the debate continues. It's not like we just like settle things at some arbitrary time and then that's it, right? So debates by their very nature are fluid. And an idea goes from being like a good idea to generally considered stupid to then someone resurrects it again and creates some new arguments to defend it. And that's a part of the process. So that's okay. That's fair. So that's notice how in that situation how I described it, person still recognizes the burden of proof. They're still respecting the threat of those objections. They're not just dismissing them. They're not just like, yeah, well, I still like my idea, so I'm going to keep on holding on to it. They're not doing that. They're having a sincere response to the significance of what transpired in that debate, and that's the key part. Another reason why I don't like how narrow these two principles are as they are worded on the code that we were looking at is that I think they have some potential to be destructive and damaging. I think they have a kind of naive picture of what the human organism is like. We're not, if we were perfectly rational beings, like we were only rational beings, then this could work. That we could just be like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna give up those beliefs and values and adopt this new set, no problem. Like I could just swap those things in and out smoothly, no pain, no cost, on the spot, just do it. But we're not really like that, right? We've got this other sides to we have this psychological side to us, this emotional side to us that's not so easy to change. It doesn't change easily or painlessly. I always kind of imagine like my reasons like jumping way ahead of the rest of me and being like, hey, check out this idea. It's so cool. Like this shiny thing, like makes so much sense. We should totally do this. And then the rest of me is kind of like, oh, do I have to go over there? No, I don't want to do that. I'll do it really slowly and begrudgingly and drag my feet about it. And that's kind of how we work. We don't, our sort of affective, emotional side of us doesn't just turn on a dime the way that reason can sometimes. I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of cool about reason, is how swift and mobile it is, how it can jump around. It's got a lot of freedom of movement. And the rest of us doesn't always cooperate that way. So I think to hold ourselves to that kind of expectation to say, well, if you can't change your beliefs like this on the spot, then you're being insincere, or that like trying to force yourself to do that, be like, oh, well, that belief got disproven, so I got to just ditch everything in my life that has to do with that thing. I think that could be really destructive, especially if we're having a debate about something that's worth having a debate over, generally something that is of a lot of importance or significance in life. I mean, those are probably the kinds of beliefs that we use to define our entire lives and like how we get meaning out of them and stuff like that. How we make pivotal decisions, how we understand who we are and what is our place in the world and how to go about interacting with life. And that's not something that can be changed very easily, especially if someone just is doing the negative project of destroying your position, just objecting to it without giving you something else that's better to replace it. That could be really destructive. And to try to hold ourselves to those standards or those expectations would be a little naive and ridiculous, I think. I think we should have some more compassion for that. That doesn't mean that it's like, well, you don't have to change. I mean, that's still something to aim for. But just the time in which it takes, I think we could be a little more patient about it and make some more room for that. Be like, one sincere response could be like, I can't change right now. This is like my entire life was defined by these sets of beliefs, by this perspective. But now that I see how wrong it is, I need to take some steps to try to extricate myself from that position. I might not be able to do it all at once, but I should be making some kind of progress or some kind of effort on it. That could be a sincere response. Take something. I mean, I use this example all the time, and I don't mean for it to be flippant because I don't hold it flippant. But sometimes these extreme examples, like alcoholism, are it happened again. I lied. Sometimes these extreme examples, like alcoholism, are really good examples. If I recognize how idiotic it is for me to do things this way, then that could be a real good step in the right direction. But it's not going to do everything all at once. I'm not going to like instantly be like, okay, well, guess I'm never going to drink alcohol again. Like human psychology is just not that flexible and plastic. So I think we should revise those to be something slightly different, but the basic point I think still applies. We should leave a debate trying to grow and change and like be bigger people than we were before, rather than just ignoring what transpired if it didn't go the way that we were hoping or something like that. So that's everything on the Code of Intellectual Conduct, guys. Thanks for watching the video. 12 simple principles here, but holy cow, a lot going on here. This thing has become richer and richer the more that I taught it. The first time I taught the code, it was something we did in half a day, if you can believe that. 30 minutes. 30 minutes, got through the code all at once. And now look, it's like 2 hours. There's a lot of rich stuff here, and I think as you gain some more familiarity with the code and practice, like having discussions using these principles, you'll find that there's a lot of rich stuff there, and I think they're very, very useful, and not just for philosophy. This is like something that has been very pivotal for how I relate to my family, to my close friends, to the people that are closest to me in my life, to myself. I mean, this is you can abuse yourself with your inner dialogue, the voices in your head. Just because there's not another human being there doesn't mean that these things don't apply. So if you guys have your own criticisms and adjustments you'd want to make to the code, things you think would make for a better code, I want to hear from those. So plan on having those prepared for me on Monday. I'll be making some space in class available for that discussion. And if you just want to discuss anything about the code and using it and applying it or whatever, I'm down to talk about it anytime. I posted in that weekend update email today what my office hours are, when I'm free, when I'm not teaching. And so look me up. I'd love to talk more. All right. Oh, I forgot to give you guys the code word. Code word. Code word. U-Haul. That's a code word. It's right there. Boom. Code word. U-Haul. That'll be our code word for today. All right. Hopefully I won't have to see too many of those boxes pretty soon. But have a great weekend, everyone. And I will see you on Monday. Bye.